University. So good afternoon, everybody. For those that do not know me, I am Anthony MacDonald, and I'm the current chair of the Irish Academy of Management. And I am delighted to welcome you today for what promises, I think, to be a really engaging and insightful hours event, where we're going to have this year's Irish Academy of Management Distinguished International Scholar Awardee, Professor Anne-Wil Harzing, in conversation with Professor Alma McCarthy, who's the head of the J.E. Cairns School of Business and Economics at the University of Galway. Just before we move on a bit, I just want to say a bit about the Irish Academy of Management for those that perhaps may not be particularly aware of who we are. We are the leading professional association for management studies, research and education on the island of Ireland, and we host several events and initiatives in support of academics and early career research and PhDs on the island of Ireland, and encourage people to join our social media channels on Twitter or LinkedIn and check in on the website and sign up for our newsletter for details of events that are upcoming. I guess just might pick out our biggest event, which is our annual conference, and that will take place from August 22nd to 24th of next year in the University of Galway. So hopefully we may see some of you in Galway next year or at events before then. In 2020, we launched the IAM Distinguished International Scholar Award, and the inaugural recipient was Professor Tom Coken. Last year's awardee was Professor Helen Eargard, and today we recognise Professor Anne-Wil Harzing. I think this award honours the achievement of outstanding individuals from the international management, education and research community whose work has significantly impacted the field. And I think in this regard, and also with the fact that we've attracted over 160 registrations, I do believe that it goes without saying that Anne-Wil is the most deserving recipient, given her most significant impact in respect to journal quality and research performance metrics and debates and aspects around these, as well as promoting diversity and inclusion in academia and promoting a positive academia, along with her research in the area of international management and human resource management, where I personally first came across Anne-Wil and I had the great opportunity to meet with her when I moved to Australia, and was very supportive then. So we have sent Anne-Wil a piece of crystal to acknowledge her for this award. So I know that Anne-Wil is that, and it's a beautiful piece of crystal just to acknowledge this award. So rather than take up further time, I'm going to pass over to Alma and Anne-Wil for what I know will be an interesting discussion. Again, invite people to please pop any questions that you might have throughout the session into the chat, and a little bit later we'll try and put as many of those questions as possible to Anne-Wil. So I'm going to pass over to Anne-Wil and to Alma now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anthony, and it's great to be here, and I want to thank Anthony and the Irish Academy of Management for giving me the opportunity to interview Anne-Wil Harzing today. It is a fantastic opportunity. I think anyone in any business school in the world knows Anne-Wil's name for various reasons, including journalists and so on and so forth, and her own scholarship, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And I'm delighted to be here. The Irish Academy of Management has been a great support to me as an academic since I was an early career researcher myself, and it's a fantastic network and support for academics in Ireland and indeed abroad, and I'm delighted to see representation from colleagues nationally, but great international representation also. So without further ado, I'm going to maybe commence our conversation now, and I'm going to start by asking Anne-Wil maybe to give us a quick whistle-stop tour, if you like, of your career, and you've so much achieved. I'm sure that's nigh impossible. But maybe if you're reflecting back on some of your highlights of your career to date, maybe we'll commence there.
Thanks so much, Alma. And just to say, it's great to see so many of you here. Lots of familiar names, lots of unfamiliar names. And I just wanted to show this really nice crystal again. It's a really nice memory of the event. So on to my career. Well, I must admit that my early career was far from planned. I did a 3.5-year professional degree in business and languages, and then a 4-year master's degree in international business. But after that, I still had no idea what I wanted to do. And I was the first in my wider family to go to university. So I really didn't have any professional role models. And I kind of stumbled upon a freelance job at the Open University in the Netherlands, which, in case you're not aware, is my home country. And that's also where I edited the first edition of my textbook in international HRM. And I was really excited to be working with top scholars in the field as a young graduate. But more importantly, I discovered I really liked university life. But I also learned that I needed a PhD to get a permanent job. So I started a PhD, and at the same time had 2 part-time jobs at 2 other Dutch universities. And that was actually quite common in the Netherlands at the time, because we didn't really have many official PhD programs at the time. And then just before finishing my PhD, I moved to the University of Bradford. I still remember being interviewed by David Weir, who is also in the call today. And after 4 years at Bradford, I moved to Melbourne in Australia. I was promoted to senior lecturer there, and then promoted to associate professor and full professor. In both cases, though, I was initially rejected. So it was certainly not a smooth career path from that perspective. And I guess in the last 30 years, I have been quite successful in my research and my teaching, but I think it's my leadership and service roles that have been most important for my impact in the field. And that's not just within universities, but even more so in the wider world of academia, because I have provided resources on my own website, harzing.com, since the late 1990s, starting actually only a few years after the internet became widespread in academia. So many academics in the audience might be familiar with the journal quality list or the publish or perish software. But 6 years ago, I also started a blog, and I try to blog weekly. And in 2020, I even started a YouTube channel. I never thought that would happen, but strange things have happened to all of us during the pandemic. And these activities, they're all shaping my current role at Middlesex University, where I have a major role in staff development and supporting early career researchers. But I think they've also really shaped my view on the importance of inclusion and being proactive in academia. And that's the topic that we'll really be focusing on today.
Yeah. So such an interesting journey, Anne-Wil, and I suppose what's really helpful for a lot of our colleagues is that it's not a straight line, and sometimes that's all we see when we see people as successful as yourself. But there's lots of little bumps and things that fate throws at us along that journey. And it's interesting that you're saying that, you know, what's of interest to you now more so maybe at this stage is this focus on inclusion, and we'll talk a little bit about proactivity and maybe positive academia as we go out throughout the hour that we have together. But maybe talk a little bit more about what do you mean or what you see as inclusion in academia, what that looks like and what it should look like.
Yeah, that's a good question, because we all use the word quite easily, but mean very different things with it. I see academia, inclusion in academia as really seeing variety in academia, not just being tolerated, but actively encouraged and appreciated. So that means that academics from different demographic backgrounds can feel they really belong in the world of academia, that they have access to the right information and resources, but also able to influence decision-making in their own organizations. So that really looks at it at the individual level, but inclusion doesn't just apply to individuals. It can also apply to, for instance, disciplines or even universities. And I see the common denominator here as not taking the current majority group as the default against which everything else is evaluated. So if I look at my own career, I've mainly focused on three areas. So first, the demographic characteristics. So that could be age, ethnicity, gender, or native language. And in this sense, I be perfectly honest, 50 plus white male native English speaking academics are currently still the dominant group. But also if we look at disciplines, we see that the sciences and the life sciences have often been used as the default against which a lot of other disciplines, and that includes engineering, but also the humanities and the social sciences, are evaluated. But even if we look at the universities, we all tend to focus on the elite research institutions, and they are held up as some sort of gold standard that the other 99.9% of the institutions in the world are expected to emulate. So it's all about majority, minority groups.
Absolutely. And I suppose what's interesting is, you know, as professors, we can get, as we move through our careers, we can focus a lot on different areas, and we're pulled across, I suppose, research and teaching and service. And sometimes we, you know, throw ourselves into the research maybe. But why has inclusion been so important for you?
Yeah, I guess it differs a bit in the different areas that I've been involved with. I really see my work in inclusion in two areas: research evaluation, broadly speaking, and then supporting female academics and early career academics. If I look at research evaluation, my motivation, honestly, originated very pragmatically and directly from my own need. Both the journal quality list and the publisher Paris software, they were a very pragmatic response to seeing my own promotion prospects frustrated. That's the honest truth. My research on bibliometrics in the social sciences, that covers new data sources such as Google Scholar, but also new metrics that I have designed and tested. That was really to accommodate disciplinary differences. And that was really a response to what I was seeing in the way the social sciences were really systematically undervalued in many countries that I worked in. So those were all very pragmatic. I would say my support for women and early career researchers, that comes mainly from a desire to ensure that the next generation of academics receive the support that I feel I've probably missed early on in my career. So that's more through personal experience.
Yeah, very good. And I suppose Harzing is synonymous with that journal quality list, and I think you were, some of the work was seminal in that regard. We have the ABS or the CABS list and so on and so forth now. So you mentioned a little bit there that it came out of a need. Could you talk a little bit maybe more about the genesis of the journal quality list and you know, what you were most proud of in doing that, because that was very, very innovative in many ways back at the time that you brought it out.
Yeah, back at the time, and it was last century. That sounds ancient now. Yeah, it was in my first permanent full-time academic job at the University of Bradford in the north of England, I was an early career researcher. I was member of the research committee as the early career representative. And I discovered that the business school at the time evaluated academics using a very old and ironically Dutch journal ranking. And they ranked the journals from A to D, with A being the highest, D being the lowest. Now, this list, like the fields at the time in the Netherlands, was very much dominated by economics. So business journals were ranking very low, all business journals, but international business journals even more so. The top journal in my field that every international business scholar wants to publish in, Journal of International Business Studies, it was ranked C, so one but lowest. The second ranked journal in the field of international business, Management International Review, was ranked D, so the lowest rank in the list. Other journals weren't even included in the list. So it was soon very clear to me that I was going to have a hard time being promoted at that university. So I volunteered to collect journal rankings from other universities to hopefully, I thought, substantiate my argument that we really needed to adjust our ranking. And I'm happy to say we did in the end. But I spent an awful lot of time doing this, creating a full spreadsheet with all of the rankings that I collected. And I thought, well, now I have this spreadsheet and it has helped me. So why not see whether it can help others too? So I had just created my own website. So I uploaded the list and I called it the journal quality list on my website. And it's now 23 years later. It's in its 69th edition. I bring out new editions in the early days, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. Now maybe once or twice a year, with 10 different rankings included. And it still gets plenty of visits, about 40 to 45,000 page visits a year. But what is important to realize in this discussion on inclusion is that the whole idea of the journal quality list was diversity. So not to create one list to rule them all, like we now have the ABS list, but rather to provide a variety of rankings from different countries so that different academics could simply use the ranking that suited them best.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were ahead of your time in many ways and ahead of a lot of the tools that are there now that make it a lot easier. So it's you kind of blazed a trail there, really. So well done on that. And then maybe would you give us a synopsis on the publisher parish software? I think that also has been very influential.
Yeah, it's probably spread wider than the journal quality list because obviously the journal quality list is in business and economics only, whereas the publisher parish software crosses disciplines. Publisher parish software is a free software program. It was created in 2006 to conduct citation analysis, but mainly to demonstrate my own citation impact after a failed promotion application to full professor. I used it to submit a revised application the next year and I was successful. So again, I thought if it helps me, it might be able to help other people too. What surprised me though is that it's now used for many different purposes. It's not just used for citation analysis for individuals, but also for literature reviews, for bibliometric analysis, people preparing for job interviews, finding target journals to submit their articles to, maybe locating the best academic with the right experience as a reviewer, as a keynote speaker, as an examiner. So it's used for a lot of different purposes. And it has, as far as I can estimate, more than 1 million users. So it clearly fulfills a need. But more importantly, again, is the inclusion elements. Right now, the software provides kind of a shell to 8 different data sources, but initially it focused on Google Scholar only. And Google Scholar had a much better coverage in the social sciences and humanities than other data sources. So it promoted inclusivity in terms of disciplines. But I would say that the more comprehensive coverage of Google Scholar also probably leveled the playing field for universities that focus more on applied research, which had a better coverage in Google Scholar, but also for academics who published in languages other than English, because most of the other databases only covered English language journals, and Google Scholar covered all journals that were available on the web. And it also actually helped individual academics because in some countries, it helped expose academic systems that were not exactly meritocratic. It's been used in countries like Italy, Greece, Poland, and Romania to expose nepotism in academia. So that was really funny to read about then. But also individual academics, and I have to say, particularly female academics. I've received feedback from quite a few who tell me that they use it a lot to look up academics before they meet them, and they find it helpful to expose what they call academic buffoons. So academics whose image management skills probably exceed their research skills and their publication profile. So being able to look these people up before you meet them can really help. And of course, I do recognize the problems with non-experts doing bibliometric analysis. There's a whole science of psychometrics out there, but I think there's no doubt that Publish or Perish has to some extent democratized citation analysis, and it has very much increased transparency. And transparency I see really as the first step to more inclusivity.
Yeah, very interesting. And as you say, having evidence and data that you can point to, of course, is the strongest tool in the box in many ways if we're trying to point out issues and systems that are problematic. And maybe moving into a particular area of inclusivity that we might be focusing on a little bit more attention to now as we move on to the next section, maybe is around the work you've been doing to support female academics in particular. Maybe talk about how that came about and maybe some of the key initiatives that you've driven in that context.
Yeah, I guess, again, there's a very kind of pragmatic, personal background to that. One of the reasons, to be honest, that I left the Netherlands in 1997 is that I couldn't really see myself becoming a full professor there. At the time, I could count the number of female professors in business and management on one hand. It's a bit better now, but the Netherlands is still at the bottom of the European rankings in terms of the proportion of female professors. But as happened with so many women, the further I got in my career, the more I became aware of gender bias that is pervading many elements of academia. So really, when I moved back to the UK in 2014, I decided we needed to organize ourselves to provide more systematic support for women in academia. And this was really the start of the SIGNA network. And SIGNA stands for SWAN, Supporting Women in Academia Network. So by now, the network, so we started 8 years ago, but by now it's grown to well over 300 members in more than 30 different countries. And we have a mailing list in which we share resources that are helpful to our SIGNA sisters, as we call them. We also have a membership spreadsheet with information on our research interests, the topics we are teaching, the journals that we would like to publish in, and the kind of advice that we can offer to others and the advice that we would like to receive. In addition to that, we get together 5 or 6 times a year, usually for 2 to 3 hours. And we have one full day meeting every year. And we will actually be celebrating our 50th meeting in December this year with a Christmas meeting at Middlesex University. And in these sessions, we talk on all sorts of topics, but it's a lot of it is about career planning and development, understanding different aspects of the university context. We also have sessions on research skills development or even interpersonal skills, such as negotiation, coaching, well-being, research supervision, interacting with professional staff, anything you name, we've probably done it or are planning to do it.
Yeah, super. Those networks are such an important support, I think, and we're only looking there at gender as one element of inclusion, and there's so much more that needs to be done across the other areas as well. And I suppose one of the things that is really important, and I think there is a changing landscape in academia, and when we look 10, 20 years hence and we look at PhD pipeline and so on, I think there's challenges there actually for many institutions across the world that we need to think about. But maybe can you talk a bit about the early career researcher supports and what work you've been doing there, because I know you've been very active with early career researchers.
Yeah, it's actually been quite important throughout my career. I've been director of the PhD program at the University of Melbourne between 2005 and 2009. and I've also been Associate Dean Research between 2010 and 2013. And in these roles, I developed a lot of initiatives to support young academics. But I've really expanded that role since I joined Middlesex in 2014. So my formal roles at Middlesex are staff development lead and research mentor, so all focused on early career development. And I've really developed over the last 8 years a very comprehensive program of research development with sessions on publishing, funding, external engagement, researcher well-being. I've even presented on this work at courses for deans and research deans at the European Foundation for Management Development, the British Academy of Management. So that kind of program is there, and that takes up a lot of my time. But I also think, and that's something that we can do, each of us can do as an academic, especially as a senior academic, is putting early career research center stage in the support we're giving one-on-one to early career researchers. And I'll give a couple of examples of that. First of all, many of us are helping early career academics with their papers. I do that a lot, providing really detailed feedback. And then many ask me to be a co-author, but I very, very rarely say yes. And I fully admit part of that is to protect my own time, because when I'm a co-author on a paper, I really do get involved. But I also want these academics to get due credit for their work, because I don't want them to publish it and then people saying, yeah, but it was only published because you had a famous co-author. So it's really important to put yourself in their perspective as well. The other thing I've started to realize in the last maybe 5 years is that we really need to provide junior academics with opportunities to shine. And as a senior academic with a very public profile, I'll get lots of invitations to speak, to contribute to research projects, whether it's special issues, be on editorial boards, be an examiner, or whatever kind of service initiative you can think of. And that's true for most senior academics. We can accept only very few of these invitations, but I always suggest one of my junior colleagues or one of my mentees as an alternative, and they are always happy to gain the experience and exposure. And I think we can do that much more systematically. And then I also spent a really big part of my time on connecting people, and a really large part of my role as research mentor and sponsor is to really open up my network to younger academics. I must admit, I'm never happier than when I can find a great co-author or a research collaborator for one of my colleagues. I just love academic matchmaking. However, to make this work, both the junior and the senior academic need to be proactive. They really need to take initiative. And I think that's probably what we will be talking about next.
Yes, and I mean, you're a great example of being proactive and taking ownership and moving things that weren't working for you, I think. And you take the journal quality list, for example, or the published and perished as an example of you seeing something not working and doing something about it. So what advice would you give to colleagues on this webinar today as to how we all can really proactively shape our own careers?
Yeah, I have to actually, before we start talking about that, I have to be very, very clear. And I'm not saying that success in careers and life is all down to individual initiative, and that if someone isn't successful, it means that they haven't tried enough. Some people build this narrative, but I'm fully aware that there are systematic biases in any system, and that there's a huge element of plain luck as well. So I would say for those junior academics who are listening, don't look to me or to other successful senior academics as some sort of superwoman or superman who will give you the template for a successful career. We can give you some tips and tricks, but don't forget, we also just stumbled our way through academia. We discovered how academia worked as we went along. And everyone's career is different. So choose a path that really works for you. And remember that where you were born, what opportunities you've had in life, they all shape who you are. And every single one of us has their own challenges and constraints in our personal lives. They could be family related, they could be identity related, they could be health related. So don't just think that you need to emulate someone else. Choose your own path. But I would say within these constraints, try and take control of your own career. If something doesn't work, take steps, however small, to initiate change. And don't be afraid to ask others for help. So really keep that caveat in mind. I do have some recommendations for both senior and junior academics, though.
So would we start maybe with the junior academics?
Yeah, I think that's best, because if we run out of time, I think the junior academics are more important. So junior academics, I think I prefer to focus on research and administration and leadership, because we don't often have that much agency in our teaching, because teaching is often assigned. So research and leadership. Well, in research, I would say don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be different and critical of current research. Again, there is bias in the system. Again, there are some academics, senior academics, or even junior academics, who are self-centered, unethical, or downright nasty. But there really isn't some sort of conspiracy to keep junior academics down. There's many senior academics, editors, and reviewers who are only too happy to help junior academics and promote a healthy academic exchange. So don't self-center. Don't hold yourself back. But also don't think that papers by senior academics automatically get published. I see some junior academics thinking that every single one of my papers sails through. We might have a better hit rate because we have more experience, but if I look at my last 3 papers, one of them had a very smooth ride, but the other 2 were rejected at 2, 3, or even 4 journals. One of them was rejected at a journal in the 4th round of revision and went to yet 2 other journals. So it sometimes takes more than 5 years for a paper to see the light. But most important is persistence. My co-authors and I persisted, and in the end, they all got published. And if I'm perfectly honest, they all got much better in the process. But when I talk to lots of junior academics, because they don't have that breadth of experience yet, and they see their papers rejected, and they're convinced that the system is biased against them. But then when I read their papers, I can clearly see that they're really not suitable for the journal they were submitted to. Or, to be honest, in some cases, were just not very well written. So I would say never send a paper to a journal without having someone else look at it. Someone preferably has an experience with the journal that you want to send it to. But someone really, a second pair of eyes beyond your co-authors. For every one of my papers, I still ask what is called a friendly reviewer. So that's someone who reads the papers before submission. They take on the role of reviewer, but they're nice reviewers. And I do that for all of my papers, and I return the favor if people in my academic network ask me to do so. So dare to be different, dare to be critical, but also be rigorous. Be respectful towards others when you get a revise and resubmit, and be responsive. If you do have a paper that you think is really good, you've spent a lot of time polishing up, but you're still struggling to get it published because you think it is too critical of the field, feel free to reach out to me. I'm really happy to provide you advice. I've done that with a couple of colleagues, and they have had their papers published.
Some great advice there, Anne-Wil, there's no doubt about that. And that tenacity, I think, is key. And I think a lot of the times we only see all of the successes. We don't see below that, the tip of the iceberg, as to just what you've very eloquently discussed there, the rejections and the resubmits and the nasty side of it. Well, maybe not nasty, but the more challenging side of it. So it's really good advice there for sure. And it's all part of the academic journey, really. Can junior academics really contribute to administration and leadership? And even this is a very good question. I'm head of school here, and you know, if there's leadership positions, and I maybe mention them to junior academics, sometimes they say, "Oh, you know, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't have the skills," and you know, so they can be self-limiting. So, can they lead effectively?
Obviously, we're not expecting an early career academic to be head of school or a vice chancellor or leading on really, really big programs. But there is a lot we can do even as juniors in shaping our academic environment. So you can start really small. We talked about the journal quality list. That really grew out of my membership of the research committee as an early career academic. Every early career academic can be part of a committee, whether it's a research committee, whether it's a teaching committee, whether it's, and I've done that as well, a very boring IT committee. You can be part of a committee and you can do your role really proactively and try and make some changes. But in my early career, I also, and that was at the University of Bradford, I also created a role for myself. It was a role that didn't exist as a coordinator for international students. I remember that was in the mid-late 90s when international student support, frankly, was still in its infancy. So I said, well, we have lots of international students here. We don't support them very well. So I think we need someone to focus on this. And because I was a researcher in cross-cultural management, I could use the knowledge from that research to provide practical sessions on, for instance, cross-cultural communication skills. With kind of 1 or 2 sessions, I found that the British students and the Chinese students were able to communicate much better. I was also an advocate for international students, but I also ended up organizing trips in Yorkshire and even organized international dinners at our home where students would come and cook dishes from their home countries. And remember, at that time, many of the students were not a lot younger than my husband and me. So did I get a workload allocation for that? No, I didn't. But it did provide me with a much greater understanding how universities work and how universities could support international students. And in fact, it even led to a funding application for a research project on differences and cultural influences on student learning styles. So it helped me in my research career as well. And to be frank, the social events were a lot of fun as well. So it's not something that my head of department asked me to do. It's not something that I got necessarily workload allocation for, but it did really help me in my career. And I've seen that with other junior academics as well. The most successful ones that I've worked with in the past 20 years were the ones who took initiative. And they tried to use the level of autonomy they had in their academic job to make improvements. Not huge improvements changing the entire university, but improvements in their own sphere of control. So they made small bottom-up improvements rather than wait for kind of management to solve everything. And too often I hear academics say, and that's often true of both junior and senior academics, by the way, someone needs to do something about it. But why not be that someone? As academics, we're not workers on a production line. We're independent professionals. So to be honest, my firm belief is that everyone should take a stint in university management. Take on roles such as program manager of a big teaching program, being head of department, being PhD director, being associate dean, not as a junior academic, obviously, but as a mid-career or senior academic, to really appreciate how difficult it is to be a university manager. And I know, Alma, that you will very much agree with this, and Anthony too, as a head of department. Academia is quite unique in that many incumbents in these management positions, they are academics themselves. And they return to be a normal academic after they take on that managerial role. And unlike what some colleagues seem to think, you don't instantly become evil when you take on a managerial role. But to understand that, I think we all need to take our share.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely, it's eye-opening, isn't it? So if maybe before we move on to our senior colleagues or more seasoned colleagues, maybe have you a couple of very quick tips that early career academics could take and they could actually apply this afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, really quick tips. First of all, if you exchange emails with someone, have a look at their email signature. Follow up if they have any publications in that signature, follow up on those. Connect with them on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just spend 5 or 10 minutes to turn that email exchange into maybe a networking opportunity. And then if you want to ask senior academics something, be realistic in what you're asking. Sending someone that you've never met before a request that might take them hours, if not days, that's unlikely to be successful. But what you could do, and what is very effective often, is ask a senior academic to endorse something for you. That's easy for them to do because it doesn't take them any time, but it might help you a lot. For instance, in my own PhD, I collected data through a survey in 24 countries. So to get more local appeal, I asked a lot of well-known local academics in these countries to be part of a committee of recommendation. And I was really shy initially to ask them, but not a single one of them said no. And I had a really great response rate for that survey. So endorsements and following up on email exchanges are 2 key things that you can start with instantly.
Super. So there's some ideas for after this call for our early career academics who might be here. And maybe moving to our more experienced or seasoned colleagues, what tips or advice would you give them in terms of proactive academia?
Yeah. Most of all, I would say walk the talk, put your money where your mouth is. I see many senior academics complaining all the time about the state of academia and how academia is going to the dogs. That's only natural. After a long time in any profession, you start to see its flaws very clearly. You can get more than a little cynical about them, but my problem is that many academics tend to voice their concerns mostly by publishing them in books or in opinion pieces in our academic journals. So you're not going to change anything by just writing about this. You need to be proactive and change our academic system and culture. However, you do need to realize that it might mean making choices that do not just continue to focus on the benefits for your own career. And one of my very good current colleagues at Middlesex once said, if you've made it to professor at 50, then you should spend the rest of your academic career supporting others in their career and serving the academic community. And I think that's an excellent principle. And that is really what I did 8 years ago when I joined Middlesex University, really focusing on supporting other academics. And then if I can, and that might be a nice final tip, don't ever think junior academics are too young to do something. I see senior academics talking about someone who is in their mid-30s, maybe even early 40s, saying, aren't they a bit young? But when you get older, and I noticed that with myself, a funny thing happens. Everyone seems young. Everyone seems inexperienced and possibly even naive. Obviously, junior academics are inexperienced. Maybe they are even naive, but that's not always a bad thing. it also means that they're not yet as jaded and cynical as most older academics are. They're willing to just give it a go. And what they miss in experience, they amply compensate with drive and energy. So let them fly, just be there in the background, but please let them make their own mistakes.
I think that's great advice, and there's a call out there to more experienced and those of us who are, I suppose, fortunate enough to be around for a while to look at what we can do to help others along, and it is part of the remit. And it would be great if, I think your approach, Anne-Wil, is so positive and so inclusive and so proactive. It would be great to see more of that across the entire academic community. Maybe at this point, I might bring in Anthony. So Anthony is moderating the chat, and I see that there are some very good questions coming in. I have just sort of been scanning them there, but Anthony has been able to immerse in them. So Anthony, you might just maybe pull out one or two of the key questions there that have come in on the chat. Yeah,
thanks, Emma, and thanks for really interesting talk so far. So I'll just go in terms of order they came in. So Ryan Turner, thanks for your talk. He thinks your point about sciences and life sciences being the dominant model in university is very interesting, and he's asking the question, given that university leadership teams are drawn from across disciplinary and non-disciplinary areas, why do you think this dominance persists?
I guess part of it is that, in my experience at least, the life sciences and the sciences have often been at the forefront of many initiatives. If we look, for instance, at what is currently becoming more important, open science, the life sciences and the sciences have been working in this area for a long, long time. Whereas in the social sciences, a lot of academics are still like, open science, what's that about? So when you're at the forefront, it's natural to assume that others are, I won't say backwards, but are lagging behind, so that there might be an inherent sense of superiority there. The other thing is probably that both the life sciences and sciences, they are more present in terms of the volume of publications, because on average, they might publish 10 times as much as academics in the social sciences. So there's just a bigger presence there. You say, Anthony, that leadership goes across disciplines. My experience, though, is that a lot of the senior leadership does draw from the sciences and the life sciences more so than from the social sciences and humanities. Might not be the case in Ireland, but it's certainly been the case in Australia and the UK.
Thanks, Anne-Wil. Dave Collins is making a useful question in terms of early career scholars and the initiatives perhaps you've seen from academies like the IAM, BAM, and so forth in terms of aiding development. Any thoughts on where you think academies' efforts may be best placed?
That's a really good question. Very much open-ended in a way. I would say a key issue is to kind of ensure that academics, early career academics, are not getting frustrated, are not getting kind of worn down by the system too early on in their career and opt out. To do that, emphasize a couple of things. The fact that resilience is key in academic careers, that you will all get rejections. Talk openly as senior academics about your own rejections, about your own disappointments, but also emphasize how important it is to build a sustainable academic career. So not just to focus on the next 2 or 3 years, but realize that an academic career might span 4 or 5 decades. So early career academics often are completely overwhelmed because they think everything needs to happen now. No, you'll have plenty of time to do all of these things in your career. You just need to survive in the first 5 years. And if you survive, you've done well.
Perfect, thanks, Will. Tina Harzing, I think encapsulates the session really well, first of all, in terms of I love listening to you, and thank you for all you did and continue to do. So she's raising a question about there are so many journals nowadays, and it can be challenging for early career researchers to identify which one to target. And it's not just, make the point about, not just about topic, it's also about getting articles accepted. And now we have a move to open ones, which can cost substantial money to publish there. And basically, any advice on how best to go about narrowing down the journals to target?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. First of all, and I've talked about this a lot in the writing boot camps that I'm running for Middlesex University. Realize that when you're writing, you're part of a conversation. You're part of a conversation with other scholars. So you need to place that conversation in an outlet where that conversation will be heard, where there is a conversation going on that topic. And obviously, in practical terms, the easiest way to figure out is look at your own reference list and look at the journals you're referencing. If you're going to submit to a journal that is not in your own reference list, you might find that what you are contributing is not contributing to the conversation there. But I think you can take a shortcut here and simply talk to your senior colleagues. If they're in the field, they can read, sometimes even just read the abstract and the introduction and say, that's a paper for this and this journal. Or that's a really interesting idea. If you tweak it a little bit, it would be a great paper for that journal. If you want to take kind of a slightly different direction, it's a great paper for that journal. So think about it as academic conversation, but also take the shortcut by talking to senior colleagues who have experience with a lot more journals than you might think, because not just the journals they've published in, but also all the journals they've been rejected for.
Perfect. And a question from Cordula Barzantni. How is the individual family situation impacting our careers in academia?
Hugely, obviously. And in that respect, as I said earlier, don't compare yourself with other academics who might have had very different paths in their personal lives. I don't have children, which has made a big difference in being able to focus more time on my career. I have one of the most supportive husbands in the world. Not everyone is so lucky to have a supportive partner. He knows more about academia than most people in the call by now, I think. So our personal circumstances matter a lot. So again, don't compare yourself to kind of top academics who might have a whole support team behind them. Compare yourself to the way you were maybe a year ago, 2 years ago. You've made progress, you've done brilliantly.
That's really useful, I think, that piece on comparison. And just maybe one final question before I pass back to Anne-Wil, which is a question that I have myself, and it's probably something that I've noticed a bit in previous years, and perhaps maybe with the advent of social media, in terms of that there often appears to be quite a bit of negativity around careers in academia in different disciplines, I guess, in many disciplines at times. And I'm kind of wondering, how can we highlight perhaps the more meaningful and the rewarding aspects of academia, given, yes, there's issues, but there is often, quite rewarding aspects. So just your perspectives on that before I pass back down there. Thanks, Anne-Wil.
Yeah, and that's a really, really great point. And yes, social media can bring a lot of negativity. Of course, there are, as we talked about, a lot of things wrong in academia. But we also need to realize that as academics, we're all kind of trained to see flaws and problems everywhere. So sometimes we do focus too much on the negatives, and we tend to embellish almost bad experiences and our lack of agency in these experiences. Horror stories about nasty reviewer too. And paper rejections. There's so much more fun and interesting to share than something like, my paper had great reviewers and I sailed through. How often do you hear someone say that? It does happen sometimes, but they won't repeat that. So really let's try and take a proactive role in emphasizing the positives. And this is something that I started early in 2022, which I've called the year of positive academia. I even created my own hashtag, positive academia. And there's a couple of things I do under that hashtag. I share positive news, I share resources, but most of all, I share LinkedIn recommendations that I've written for my colleagues. And I don't know whether you all know this feature of LinkedIn. You can write a recommendation for someone. It's about a bit like writing a reference letter, but then public and much shorter. And I've written about 50 or 60 of those. And I find that little gestures like this can make a real big difference for academics in your network. So if we all write one recommendation for someone else, then collectively we can make academia a much nicer place. And if that's too public for you, writing a recommendation on LinkedIn, if you're too shy for that, you could just write a kind email to someone occasionally if there's something that you think they've done very well or you admire about them. We really can't change academic cultures overnight. None of us can. But I think we can all play our part. Just one email or one recommendation at a time, small steps at a time.
Thanks very much, Anne-Wil, and I think that brings us nicely to a close for our interview today. It has been an absolute pleasure to have had the opportunity to have this conversation with you, Professor Anne-Wil Harzing from Middlesex University in London. You're a fantastic recipient of the Distinguished International Scholar for the Irish Academy of Management at two levels. Number one, because you're such an accomplished and internationally renowned scholar in your own right. And secondly, and perhaps as important in some ways, and it seems to be for you personally, is that you are a great academic community citizen, and you certainly are walking the talk. So it has been, as I say, an absolute pleasure. And I would like to thank Anthony MacDonald, the Irish Academy Management Council, for setting up this webinar today and asking me to have the pleasure of interviewing you. And finally, a little shout out to the Irish Academy of Management Conference in August 23, which we will be very proudly hosting here at the University of Galway on the Wild Atlantic Way here in the west of Ireland. Mm-hmm. It'll be a fantastic conference in a great city and a great country. So I hope that many of you will attend. And thanks to everybody for coming on today.
Thank you, Alma. You were a brilliant interviewer.
Thanks, Anne.